In 1949, George Orwell published an essay called Reflections on Gandhi. So this would have been written, say, a year, perhaps 14, 16 months after the assassination of Gandhi on 30th January 1948. Among my listeners, I suspect there's no one who really needs an introduction to George Orwell, the author of 1984, most famously, and then, of course, of novels such as Animal Farm, the anti-totalitarian novel, Burmese Days, which is a wonderful novel on colonialism, on British colonialism, and on social relations, or the lack thereof, between the British, and in this case, the Burmese, South Asians, we might say more generally. George Orwell, incidentally, was born in India, but that's a different story, and served in the Indian Police Service. Orwell also wrote Homage to Catalonia, but he was, in addition to all of this, a superb essayist. And Reflections on Gandhi is included in a great many anthologies, including college textbooks on literature and textbooks on the essay. This is an essay that I have read many times. I've cited from it. It's an essay with which I have many disagreements, but I think it's a wonderful illustration of how to put across a set of ideas. And Orwell was certainly very much an opinionated man. Now, this is how the essay begins. Saints should always be judged guilty until they are proved innocent. So he writes in a certain inimitable style. They should always be judged guilty until they are proved innocent. But the tests that have to be applied to them are not, of course, the same in all cases. In Gandhi's case, the questions one feels inclined to ask are, to what extent was Gandhi moved by vanity, by the consciousness of himself as a humble, naked old man sitting on a praying mat and shaking empires by sheer spiritual power? And to what extent did he compromise his own principles by entering politics, which of their nature are inseparable from coercion and fraud? And this is, of course, I might say, the fatal mistake of George Orwell. I mean, it's almost pedestrian. I said that the first sentence was extraordinary, inevitable. But at the same time, there's something very pedestrian. Why so? Because what Orwell does here in these opening 10 lines is to set up that old cliched contrast, stemming from the question that everyone was asking in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s, especially in England, perhaps in the West more broadly. And that is, was Gandhi a saint or was he a politician? And there were those who said, he's far too much of a saint to be a politician. And there are those who said he's far too much of a politician to be a saint. Right? And you can see that how this particular framing is informing this very question. But of course, Orwell being Orwell, one of the things that he's going to do in a way is he's going to move away from it. So he makes a kind of a declaration of faith, so to speak, well, that this is the overarching principle with which I'm going to begin. But then as he delves into Gandhi's life, you get a very interesting set of observations, right? And he's very honest. He's very honest. So it's about 10 pages long. There is an comparatively speaking, of course, extended treatment of Gandhi's autobiography, which he says very candidly that he first remembers reading these pages in the ill-printed, the opening chapters and the ill-printed pages of some Indian newspaper, because the autobiography was, he's right, serialized. Okay. They made a good impression on me, which Gandhi himself at that time did not. This is what I mean by Orwell's honesty. And towards the end, he says, I have never been able to feel much liking for Gandhi, but I do not feel sure that as a political thinker, he was wrong in the main, nor do I believe that his life was a failure, right? So Orwell proceeds almost like an agnostic, which he really was in life. He might even have been an atheist. He certainly was an agnostic. And I think that this essay very much reflects the kind of temperament and thinking that he had generally, except, if I may say so, on the subject of England and Englishness, which I will leave aside for the moment. Right? So he discusses some of the details and Gandhi's autobiography, and one of the things he says that, look, there are all these things that make some of his critics say, well, he was just like any other person. He stole money from his father. He ate meat surreptitiously, because he came from a vegetarian family. The Vaishnava and Jain influence was very strong. And for those of you who read his autobiography, you know that he tried meat on the sly, right? And his childhood friend Mehtab even took him to a brothel. But then Gandhi says that, when he arrived there, then he kind of ran. He was too afraid to do anything, right? And Orwell says that, the only way we know about all of these limitations of Gandhi's life is, well, because Gandhi tells us in his autobiography. And he says that, in the large scale of things, it amounts to nothing. I mean, it's a little experiment with eating meat. Okay, he takes a few gold coins from his father's purse and then repents. And then in the autobiography, Gandhi describes how both he and his father, sobbed, because Gandhi went and confessed to his father. I mean, to someone like Orwell, it's almost comical, frankly, actually. And he says that, all of these sins really amount to nothing, because this is the life really of virtue, right? And this is actually what I think Orwell finds a little disturbing, right? That this is really too much a life of virtue here that we have. And he says that one of the problems that he has with Gandhi is that Gandhi subjects us to tests which are not human. Right? So he says, for example, that one of the fundamental things about being a human being is that we value some people more than we value others. Right? That we choose to be friends with some people. You cannot be friends with everyone. Well, the cynic might say, including myself, that with such idiotic things like Facebook around, well, you can have 5,000 friends, whatever that means. It's unthinkable, unfathomable what it might mean to actually have 5,000 friends. Having, 50 would be miraculous. Having 5,000, this is beyond the realm of thinking. All right. And of course, I'm aware of the fact that the friends that one has on Facebook are not friends in the same sense in which we think of friendships. But the point here is that when we think of human relationships, we choose to have friends. Right? Friendship is important. Many great essays have been written on friendship. Right? And he says that what Gandhi did was he imposed conditions upon himself, upon his disciples. And he says that it is difficult to think of the idea of friendship within that circle, that Gandhi had disciples and followers and admirers, right? But can we say that he had friends? And so Orwell says, close friendships, Gandhi says, are dangerous because friends react on one another, and through loyalty to a friend, one can be led into wrongdoing. This is unquestionably true, writes Orwell. Moreover, if one is to love God or to love humanity as a whole, one cannot give one's preference to any individual person. And of course, this is what Gandhi chose to do, to love humanity as a whole. Right? This again is true, and it marks the point at which the humanistic and the religious attitudes cease to be reconcilable. They cannot be reconciled. And Orwell is writing from an eminently humanistic standpoint. He sees himself as belonging to the great humanist tradition of the West. And he sees Gandhi as belonging to a tradition of asceticism. Right? And as I said, all of this may be deeply questionable. So, for example, I think Orwell's understanding of Gandhi's relationship to sexuality, which I have written about at very great length, with my first long piece on this going back 2 decades ago, I think Orwell's understanding of it is extremely limited. It's extremely limited because he's really coming from the standpoint of someone who has grown up in the liberal / socialist humanist tradition of, quote, the secular West. And this means that there are entire worldviews which are really outside the ambit of his thinking, the ambit of his thinking. Right? But this is a wonderful essay because he is very sensitive to what he sees as Gandhi's merits as well. So, for example, on the whole question of nonviolence, he says that the world cannot. He's writing, of course, a couple of years, 3 years, three and a half years after the end of World War II, right? And World War II itself had come on the heels of World War I, which was supposed to be the last great war, that there was never going to be another war on that scale. This is what Europeans thought, right? So he's saying, Orwell is saying, writing at this juncture in time, that Gandhi shows us a way. He shows us a way. And this is the way of nonviolence. That after all is said and done, one can have an aesthetic dislike for Gandhi, which he says he does, right? Last few sentences. One may feel, as I do, a sort of aesthetic distaste for Gandhi. One may reject the claims of sainthood made on his behalf. He never made any such claim himself, by the way. Orwell adds parenthetically, one may also reject sainthood as an ideal and therefore feel that Gandhi's basic aims were anti-human and reactionary. One may do all of that, but he says, but regard it simply as a politician. Right? So Orwell has made the choice. I'm going to think of him as a politician. And that means I'm going to compare him to Churchill, to Roosevelt, to Hitler, to Stalin, to Lloyd George, to Disraeli, right? To hundreds of other politicians. But regard it simply as a politician and compare with the other leading political figures of our time, how clean a smell he has managed to leave behind. That Gandhi at least was incorruptible. One might disagree with him. One might think that his mode of dressing and his comments on food, his thoughts on sexuality, that all of this is distasteful, especially to someone who's an urbane, cosmopolitan figure, right? But that balanced against that is the fact that Gandhi was in the main not wrong in his political thinking, right? That there is something there, and that at the end of the day, it is Gandhi who is going to help deliver India from British rule. Right? His main political objective, writes Orwell, the peaceful ending of British rule had, after all, been attained. And this is a rejoinder to those who say that Gandhi was a failure. Right? So can't discuss all the intricacies of this essay, but it is written with Orwell's usual extraordinary flair, and it's an essay that I recommend very highly.